One of the most surprising things that I keep finding in historic guitar methods and similar sources is the suggestion to use the little finger of the right hand to pluck the string. I found it in nearly 20 sources so far, ranging from the early 19th century to the early 20th century. The earliest of them all is 1806. It's in Simon Molitor's Guitar Sonata, and there's a passage there where he instructs the player to play the 5-note chords with all 5 fingers of the right hand. And if you look at the 4 bars on the screen, I think you'll see why. If you were to play these 5-note chords with just 4 fingers, you'd have to play the 2 lower notes with the thumb, like this. The problem with that is that the thumb is quite a strong finger, and those 2 lower notes will sound quite prominent, and consequently the chord will sound a bit unbalanced. Whereas if you play the chord with 5 fingers, you'll get a lighter and more balanced sound, I think. So I'll try and demonstrate the difference. Here is the passage played with 4 fingers. And then with 5 fingers. And this is the most common reason I found in historic sources for using the little finger, to use it for 5-note chords. Another interesting example is from 1820. It's in Johann Jakob Staehlin's method. Now he suggests using all 5 fingers of the right hand here because the chords would be impossible to play with only 4 fingers. The reason being that the 2 lower notes are not on consecutive strings. So if you were to play these chords with only 4 fingers, you'd either have to remove a note in order to make it playable, or you'd have to arpeggiate the chord, moving the thumb very quickly over, which would be difficult to play and wouldn't sound good either. Whereas if you just use the little finger, it becomes a very easy passage to play. Aguado also suggests in one edition of one of his methods to use the little finger, though I can't find it in subsequent editions, which is a bit strange. However, there is a study that he wrote, which is quite interesting, an arpeggio study, which you'll see on the screen, and the text at the top of the study says, "The fingers on the right hand will play the arpeggio in order, leaving the lowest voice for the thumb." Now this clearly implies that the very top note, the B, in the first bar, should be played with the little finger. And it's quite a good arpeggio study if you want to practice using the little finger. A few other methods go even further than these previous ones and recommend using the little finger equally, or almost equally, with the other fingers. One interesting reason given by Nicolai Makarov in 1874 is because it is only with this finger, the little finger, that one can draw the sweetest, most flute-like sounds. This is actually the reason I started using the little finger. Modern guitarists tend to homogenize the sound. They try to make each finger sound the same to get a very even sound. And to some extent I do this too. It's often a musical necessity, but there is something to be said for using the particular characteristics of each finger. Lutenists do this for articulation especially. They have a concept of strong and weak fingers, the thumb being a strong finger, the middle finger being a strong finger, the others being weak fingers. And I also think by leaning on particular timbral characteristics of the fingers, we can get quite musical results. The little finger is usually a thin finger, and so it has a somewhat brighter sound, usually. And so I find this very useful for melody notes. I actually find it a stronger finger than the ring finger, so it's particularly useful for those top notes. Another interesting example of using the little finger for a special effect is by the American 19th century guitarist Henry Worrall. He used it for this speed burst effect with the 4 fingers of the right hand. I've never seen this before, so it's not really something I can demonstrate to you, having not practiced it. But you can see on the score how it would sound. It's quite easy to imagine. Or I should say, in these 19th century scores, the right hand fingering is indicated by dots. So the 4 dots are the little finger, 3 dots are the ring finger, etc. Later, in the 1920s, Domingo Prat would write a method on how to use the little finger. He also did something quite strange, which he advocated reversing the order. So usually if you are arpeggiating with 5 notes, you'd go P, I, M, A, C, C being the letter for the little finger. But Prat advocated also going P, C, A, M, I, which is quite hard to do. It's easier to do in his case because he adopted the Tarraga-like hand position. He was a student of Tarraga. And so the wrist was quite bent like this, and so your hand is in a better position for reversing the fingers either way. In a more modern, or even an early 19th century hand position, it's much harder to follow his method, I think. So I should say, in this sort of 100-year period from the early 19th century to the early 20th century, the players recommending use of the little finger came from all over the place, from America, from Russia, from Germany. Some played without nails, some played with nails, some rested their little finger on the soundboard, some emphatically didn't. So possibly you can infer from this that it may have been fairly widespread practice to play with a little finger, at least among more advanced players. Although, of course, it's very hard to know, and I'm speculating quite a bit. With regards to the little finger on the soundboard, this is quite interesting. Many 19th century guitarists would play with the little finger planted on the soundboard, just lightly, but it would be there as a sort of point of reference. Particularly players who played without nails. Players who played with nails, much less likely to do this. Now, you would think that having the little finger on the soundboard would restrict its use and make it much harder to use it as a finger for plucking. However, I actually find that if you rest your little finger on the soundboard, you end up in a hand position with the wrist tilted this way, which is much easier for plucking with the little finger. If you have a hand position like this, a more modern position, the little finger being short struggles to get to the string, whereas if the hand's like this, the little finger is already very close to the string. So that hand position works very well for me with using the little finger. Going on further into the 20th century, I've read that Villa-Lobos used the little finger. Stepan Rack and Charles Postlethwaite quite famously advocated for its use. Charles Postlethwaite wrote a book on the subject, which is quite useful. And they used it very much as an equal to the other fingers, so they had a 4-finger tremolo and other quite difficult techniques. And actually, I've been surprised to discover, when I've talked with other guitarists about this, how many current guitarists are actually using the little finger. It seems to be almost this secret technique. It's often practiced, but not really written about. With regards to myself, I've been using the little finger for a few years now. I used to regard it as something odd that I did, and I would never encourage other people to do it. It just worked for my particular hands. But increasingly I'm convinced of its utility. And I think every guitarist should give it a try. And I think the fact that there is such historical precedent for it really encourages me to keep doing it and to encourage others to do it. Oh, I should add one other reason I think it's a good thing to try using it is because of tension problems. You often see guitarists who have a little finger that protrudes out as they're playing, or if they're resting on the soundboard, it's really fixed firmly on the soundboard in a way that's not good at all. The little finger can become a sort of dead weight. It can work against the other fingers. Whereas if you actually learn to use it, I found it very liberating. And I found that some of the tension problems I did have with that finger pretty much disappeared. It was very useful. So there you go. Why not give it a try? I recommend at first experimenting with 5-note chords, make sure they're balanced and together, which can be quite difficult at first. Try arpeggiating them and go from there. Thank you for watching.